The battle began with what soldiers called the Steel Rain. Hundreds of drones swarming overhead, missiles streaking toward Ukrainian positions, and radar warnings screaming across command posts. For a moment, it looked as if nothing could stop Russia's firestorm. Then came a single radio call. Vulture 7 is offline. I repeat, Vulture 7 is non-responsive. That failure threatened to unravel Ukraine's defenses entirely. But what a single sergeant did next flipped the entire war zone on its head. Here's how. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How do you stop 810 drones, 4 ballistic missiles, and 9 cruise missiles all arriving at once? That was the exact nightmare Ukraine faced when Russian forces opened their assault with what operators on the ground nicknamed the Steel Rain. The sky filled with swarms of unmanned aircraft, each carrying explosives or electronic warfare packages, cutting through the clouds like a wall of moving shrapnel. Mixed in were heavy missile salvos aimed at command centers, radar stations, and fuel depots. It wasn't just an attack intended to break defenses. It was designed to paralyze decision-making itself. Inside Ukraine's command bunkers, radar operators watched green arcs crisscross every part of their screens. The number of threats flashing at once created an almost unsolvable puzzle. Which blips represented drones that could be ignored, which demanded an immediate intercept, and which were decoys meant to pull away interceptors? Every second counted. Half a heartbeat too long and one missile might slip through. Communications lines crackled with overlapping commands, while jamming pushed headsets into static bursts. It was a wall of noise layered on top of a wall of movement. Crews at surface-to-air batteries fought to track lock as the data poured in. Patriot radars swept distant air corridors. Iris-T systems scanned lower and faster incoming profiles, and domestic interceptors scrambled to engage gaps in between. Ukrainian engineers had built their air defense like interlocking shields, but the pressure was relentless. Even as missiles streaked across the horizon, their own counter-drones lifted off. These weren't just for defense. They were hunting in the opposite direction, slipping in behind Russian lines while the storm raged above. Among the cleverest moves was the release of 270 electronic warfare drones. Small, fast, and linked to ground controllers, these drones didn't aim to destroy Russian defenses. They aimed to blind them. S-400 launchers and Pantsir S-1 systems had locked most of the Russian spearhead inside a shield of radar coverage. For Ukrainian forces to strike back, that shield had to go dark. The EW drones buzzed low and clustered around the Russian positions, blasting signals that scrambled radar feeds. Within minutes, operators inside the Russian bubble were reporting phantom aircraft, false targets, and blank screens. That single wave stripped the advancing columns of the protective eyes they relied on. Yet Ukraine's layered web was far from perfect. The system balanced on constant communication, with nodes carrying critical data from one end to the other. Suddenly, one of those nodes, call sign Vulture 7, went silent. On the radios, there was nothing. One operator looked across at another. The silence stretched. If that gap stayed open, one corridor in the sky was now undefended, and a Russian missile stream could pour through. The defensive crews could almost feel the air thicken. Seconds became longer than minutes. Then came the decision that kept the line from breaking. A single sergeant, not waiting for clearance from above, rerouted an entire EW unit. He stripped coverage from a secondary task, redirected their fire, and stormed attention toward one rogue S-400 still shining through Ukrainian interference. The hasty maneuver shoved concentrated jamming directly onto the Russian radar, drowning its signal completely. Within moments, the gap sealed. Fire control officers sighed in relief, and the air picture stabilized again. That improvisation bought Ukraine valuable seconds. Long enough for intercept batteries to reload. Long enough for their own drones to continue slicing deep into Russian formations. And long enough to prepare the strike that didn't just protect defenses, but aimed at the heart of Russia's command system waiting just beyond the front line. Imagine a massive army suddenly blinded, unable to coordinate or even move forward. How does that collapse begin? For Russia's spearhead, it started the moment its air defenses faltered. Once Ukraine's electronic warfare drones scrambled the radars shielding their advance, reconnaissance crews watching from high-altitude platforms caught sight of something even more valuable than columns of tanks: the main Russian command post. Camouflaged, ringed with armored vehicles, and buried under layers of communication arrays, this was the node directing artillery fires, guiding missile launches, and feeding instructions into every armored formation pressing toward Ukrainian soil. It wasn't just another target of opportunity. This was the brain of Russia's assault. The command staff inside were responsible for fusing artillery coordinates with forward observers, calculating tank maneuvers, and keeping the entire sequence of attacks synchronized. Without it, every separate formation would still exist, but they would operate like isolated pieces of a machine cut off from its own wiring. Ukrainian commanders weighing the risks understood the stakes. Leave it intact, and missile batteries would keep raining fire and armored spearheads would push without pause. Strike it, and the most complex assault the Russians had launched in months could collapse into confusion. The order was given. A swarm of attack drones, already circling, shifted from loitering patterns to strike runs. Guided by live reconnaissance feeds, they maneuvered at staggered heights to overwhelm short-range defenses. Operators fed corrections in real time, adjusting for interference while watching the thermal images of the target sharpen. Seconds later, the first explosions detonated around the perimeter as drones slipped past protective units. Charges carried on lighter drones burst across antennas and vehicle-mounted communication dishes. Then the heavier munitions tore into the command shelter itself. The effect was immediate and visible even beyond the impact site. Russian encrypted channels fell silent. For units still advancing, radio transmissions that had been steady turned into emptiness. Tank crews waiting for movement orders paused, confused, and artillery batteries holding coordinates lost their fire adjustments. The entire assault rhythm stalled in place, not from lack of firepower, but from the absence of direction. At ground level, Ukrainian armor crews were already staging for that exact moment. Their armored reserve, a force of 58 tanks split between Leopard 2s and upgraded T-64s, rumbled from concealed positions. Ukrainian troops had been waiting for a break in Russian coordination, and now it materialized. As the Leopards rolled into view, their crews locked gunners onto Russian spearheads that sat idling on open terrain. The precision of their main guns carved through stalled formations, shredding armored columns one after another. Explosions echoed as abandoned Russian vehicles smoldered in lines that only hours earlier represented the cutting edge of an offensive. The scenes carried a brutal clarity. Steel monsters meant to storm forward had been left immobile, exposed. Some crews bailed out, leaving modern vehicles intact only to be hit moments later by advancing Ukrainian shells. The Leopard's 120mm gun drove shockwaves through entire units, while accompanying T-64s fired in coordinated salvos, widening the wreckage field across acres of countryside. The Russian spearheads, built for breakthrough, now looked more like graveyards of armor strung along the approach routes. Even as the ground battle tilted in Ukraine's favor, another layer unfolded deeper behind the lines. Ukrainian missile brigades launched Grom-2 ballistic systems toward Russian rear installations. Supply nodes, fuel depots, and airfield hangars that supported the ongoing assault erupted in fire strikes. By severing these arteries, Ukraine struck not just at the immediate battlefield, but at the logistical lifelines that sustained it. In hours, the strike packages had gutted both frontline coordination and the deeper flow of reinforcements. All of this unfolded in less than 2 hours. An assault that entered with overwhelming firepower, not just drones and missiles, but tanks, artillery, and coordinated command, was reduced to halting retreats, scattered regrouping, and abandoned equipment. The haunting question left behind carries forward. Was it the swarm of drones that truly cracked the offensive? Was it armored precision that broke the back of Russian spearheads? Or were the long-range strikes dismantling supply nodes the hidden factor that tipped the balance? The outcome of this battle showed it wasn't a single weapon that turned the tide. Ukraine's success came from how electronic warfare, drone swarms, armored strikes, and long-range missiles all worked together as one networked system. Each piece reinforced the other, creating pressure Russia could not absorb. And that raises a larger question. In future wars, it may not be the side with the biggest arsenal that wins, but the side that fuses every domain into one coordinated strike. So which mattered most here? The drones, the armor, or the missiles? Could the next war be won by brains over brute force?